Attackers are only getting more proficient, so how can you proactively adapt your cybersecurity strategy? Core Security by Fortra helps you uncover and prioritize the risks that pose the biggest threat to your organization. Core Impact is a penetration testing tool that safely finds and exploits vulnerabilities using the same techniques as attackers. You can conduct advanced pen tests with ease using certified exploits and automations. Take your engagements even further by pairing with our additional red teaming tools from Cobalt Strike and Outflank. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Fortra Core Security. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Join us at an upcoming official cybersecurity summit in a city near you. This series of one-day, invitation-only, executive-level conferences are designed to educate senior cyber professionals on the latest threat landscape. We are pleased to offer our listeners $100 off admission when you use code SECWEEK23 to register. Visit securityweekly.com/cybersecurity summit to learn more and register today. All right, and for our second interview today, Patty Harrington joins us to talk about IoT security. Patty is a senior analyst at Forrester Research, advising security and risk professionals. He focuses on endpoint security for everything from desktops to servers to IoT, which is what we're talking about today. Welcome to the show, Patty.
Thanks, Adrian. Good to be here.
Yeah, good to have you back. We've had you on a few times before, had some good discussions. And IoT, I feel like I haven't been hearing enough about IoT lately. I think the last time we had somebody on to talk about IoT actually wasn't that long ago. We had, I think her name was Grace from IOXT Alliance, talking about building the security labels, that will actually presumably come on packaging and things like that. They're mostly focused on consumer stuff, but with IoT, it all bleeds together these days. It's there's a lot of stuff that you might think of as consumer, but you're still going to find in a lot of businesses and enterprises. So I guess maybe that brings me to my first question. The work that you're doing, this report you just had come out, the State of IoT Security Report. What's the scope of it? What are you looking at?
So most of what we look at in this is on the business side of things. So we take the data from our surveys, which go to business leaders, either IT, telecom, or in the security side, and we try to understand what's affecting them for IoT. And the problem I think we find in the business world is IoT ranges from things that they just got shipped in last week to stuff that they've had in place 10, 15, sometimes even 20 years. So you've got this really broad range of devices on the network. And like you said, these are ranging from a smart TV or a projector to a check scanner, a rapid check scanner that's inside of a bank that has been in place for decades. And this is really a problem, I think, that the businesses are trying to get a hold of. The issue is this stuff is not stopping. We're not reducing the amount of IoT devices. We just keep adding in more and more devices, and it's just compounding the problems that already exist now.
Yeah, definitely. And, I love this kind of chat because I feel like we sometimes need a reality check. If you look at our news segments, the stuff we talk about, we talk about a lot of emerging technology. We talk about a lot of the latest, security markets and categories and things like that. And it's easy to forget that a lot of networks out there, I don't know what percentage, maybe most of them, are still pretty old school. There are still companies who manage their own data centers, who use the cloud minimally. Even folks who are maybe 100% cloud probably still have IoT devices, and things that are maybe unsupported, unsecured. I remember, last time I was really doing pen tests on a regular basis was maybe 5 years ago, and still finding, just tons of admin on, security cameras and all kinds of stuff like that.
Yeah, what's really bad is take that admin scenario that you talked about. These devices have this stuff hard coded in a lot of the older devices. And compounding to that is the information is publicly known. So there's websites that maintain these lists of the admin logins for all of these devices that are all over the place. And these go from, like I said, the simple stuff to heavy, we'll say, industrial machines. But then there's the other side of this where you get devices that are proprietary, so their firmware is proprietary. Okay, a little tougher to attack. But then you've got stuff that's built off Linux and it's different kernel variants. So it was built, we'll say, 5 years ago and hasn't really been updated since. So the amount of exploits in that Linux kernel just off the chart. Or some of the more scary ones are Windows-based IoT devices that are built running Windows 7, Windows XP, Windows 2000. There was one, yeah, right. And there was one I remember talking to not too long ago. Someone had it on their network running NT4.
Yeah, sure.
This is a honeypot waiting to happen.
Yeah, permanently NT4 is permanently vulnerable to MS-08-067. Ask me how I know.
Little experience there, huh?
Yeah, definitely. It's back when I was a PCI QSA, I was also a pen tester at the same time. And in payment networks, you'd find all kinds of crazy stuff. Yeah, that's why I mentioned Windows CE. There was a fast food restaurant chain, that I did, and all their POS devices were based on Windows CE back in 2012. So that's 11 years ago. Surely they've upgraded. Now we've kind of had this revolution in POS devices where like a lot of stuff is iPad based, like much better platforms than the janky glued together IoT devices we used to see in the past. But I imagine some folks out there are still using the old stuff.
Yeah, and especially when you get to the larger businesses, you look at say verticals like healthcare, finance, manufacturing, even they get these devices in place and they hum, they maintain. In banking,
20-year lifespan, 25-year lifespan.
The ATMs. How often do you see an ATM being ripped out and replaced? It's not often. So, the code that's running on there, it just maintained. And there's been a lot of initiatives as of late, the last couple of years to drive these companies either through standards or government regulations. Not a fan of, but another story. And trying to get them to maintain the firmware or OS for these devices on a longer timeline until the thing is truly dead. The hardware decides to kick out on it.
Right.
But that's only newer stuff. And these environments are running things that are ancient. Think of, watching a hospital bring in an MRI machine. This is an industrial IoT device. And how often is the firmware updated on that?
Yeah, so in the last conversation, we were talking about the difficulty of data discovery and classification. That's certainly one challenge, but we have it here in IoT as well. Back a couple years ago, I was doing product reviews, and for SE Magazine, you can actually still find these product reviews on semagazine.com if you go to research and then Security Weekly Labs. And one of those we were looking at where, I don't know, Patty, if you study these products, if you follow the space as well, but your QRT, right? Qualys Rapid7 Tenables. If I were to scan my lab with those products, which I did, it's my lab is all built on Ubiquiti devices, which do run a form of Linux. They at its core, it is Debian. But obviously highly customized to their use case, and it doesn't recognize them despite the MAC address, being registered by Ubiquiti. Ubiquiti has a custom service that they run that, without authentication, will tell you what the model number, serial number, the firmware version, anything you want to know about the device, it'll tell you, but a lot of these companies just haven't done the work of, correctly cataloging all these IoT devices so that they can correctly identify them. So that seems like a huge gap in the market right now is that there are so few products, and I think one of them is Run Zero, which used to be Rumble, is probably the best one I've seen at correctly identifying these devices. But if you don't even know they're there or what they are, much less if the firmware version is current, like how do people solve that problem without just like throwing a ton of manual work and people at it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Some of the are, we'll say, the large scale IoT management and security platforms, right? And there's a dozen or so of them out there. Massive names that people know, like Clarity. Clarity came from the OT side, right? If you look at their name, there's OT right in the middle of it. And they've been expanding into the IoT world. Armis is another one that does a lot in this space. And they really take that, like I said, the Mac lookup, and they build that into their databases so that when they do either a passive or active scan, they can find the device, compare Macs, and figure out exactly what this is. But some of the interesting ones that are happening now are the edge devices, right? So different gateway manufacturers, firewall manufacturers are introducing IoT discovery solutions so that as this product is reaching out, it's an Internet of Things device, right? IoT. It picks up what the Mac is and understands, oh, let me do a Mac lookup and figure out who you are, what you are. And they start classifying these devices so you can at least now understand what's on the wire talking out. Now, it's not going to, find the stuff that has a bad gateway address, right? You can't truly identify, but at least gives you something of understanding what is talking through your edge so you can start identifying what's out there. And some of this stuff is fairly new, right? At least on the edge side. But then there's other solutions, like I say, that are starting to recognize, oh, we have to include sensors and scanners that can not only detect these devices, but do it safely. Because I'm sure you've seen this when you're doing pen testing. If you scan a device, some of these things, either IoT or OT devices, improperly, it blows up.
Mm-hmm.
In the IoT world, one of the common ones is if you do a vulnerability scan on a printer and it's not targeted for a printer, it just spits out junk, right?
Yeah. Jet Direct, what was it? TCP 9100. Yeah, it'll just print whatever data. It's the raw print port, right?
Yeah. So a lot of the newer solutions, like I said, they're starting to do a safe scan so that they can recognize the IoT device without disturbing it, and then categorize it and catalog it so that you at least know what's there. And then, like I said, as the solution gets better, the more broad-based solutions can do lookups of that device and say, okay, I'm going to look this up to the manufacturer and compare firmware revisions or OS revisions. Are there known flaws, known vulnerabilities? And when you tie some of this stuff into the SOC tools, right? SIMs, SOARs, XDR solutions, you now get a complete picture of the devices on the wire and how vulnerable they are. So you can start addressing it. Is it going to solve all these problems and get everything? No, but it's a step in the right direction.
Right. Yeah, we see a lot of passive scanners and things like that. A lot of OT security products do that. But still, you shouldn't have to buy. I feel like you shouldn't have to buy 3, 4, 5 different products, just to do asset discovery and identification and vulnerability scanning for all your devites. So hopefully there's some consolidation there. And like there's now. Tenable.ot, Tenable's bought an external attack surface management company. So we do see some of this consolidation happening, but it seems like it's going slowly. But
and it's sad to me because it took so long to do this. I mean, if you look at our reports over the last few years, right? We talked here, State of IoT 2023, but part of State of Endpoint 2022 that we did last year, we talked about targets. IoT was in the 34% range there. 2021, another IoT security report, State of IoT Security. It wasn't the top target, right? But it was a close number 2 behind the company website. So IoT devices have been a target for years. And Forrester reporting on it for a while now. And now we're just getting to, we have to address these problems. Well, we're doing this years ago.
Yeah. Well, so you mentioned the reports. Let's get into that. Tell us a little bit about this state of IoT security report. I understand it's something that you do annually, but where does the data come from? What's the methodology for this report?
Yeah, so on the state of reports, state of IoT, state of endpoint, we use Forrester's data, right? And this is collected through our various surveys that we do. And as I say, for these are business focused. So IoT leaders or IT leaders, telecom leaders, security, and trying to understand with the businesses, right, what they're seeing within their deployments. So, what I talked about there, right, of IoT being a target of attack, it's part of the security survey. So asking, okay, how many times were you attacked externally within the last year? And those numbers get really scary. Some of the reports that we do out of that, it's, the numbers keep growing and it's really bad. But okay, you were attacked, say, 3 times last year. And then the follow-up question is, what was the target of those attacks? And obviously we have the list of them. And like I said, these are Forrester data sets that we utilize this. So it's an analysis of this data and what we're seeing across the businesses. And it's when you start putting this all together and comparing this across the survey itself, right? So within the security survey or with the infrastructure survey, and see how the leaders think about securing, right, these IoT devices, you get some stuff that is eye-opening. For example, in the infrastructure and telecom survey, one of the things we found, and it's in the report, is security was towards the top of concerns for IT and telecom leaders, right? Mm-hmm. But security of IoT was a bit lower on the security leader side than other initiatives. And it's like, wait a second. You folks said the security survey, the IoT was your top target, like I said, about 32, 33%. All right, of the respondents said IoT was an attack target. Great. But security of these devices is lower than other priorities. But I have an issue with that. And especially that distraction from the telecom folks saying, no, security of IoT is pretty big on our list. So as you start going through this data and realizing it, you start scratching your head going, why aren't people more concerned? Or why aren't they doing anything about this?
Well, so it's interesting. So what you're talking about there is they're concerned about it, but not doing anything about it. So I wonder if the issue is decisiveness, like they or strategy, like they just don't know what to do about it, or haven't found a good approach to tackle it, or maybe they don't have the people to go after it. Like I was saying before, that this is just so. It's so difficult to just discover and identify these things, and not even talking about finding the asset owner, figuring out who owns this thing, who should be updating firmware on these things. Like it's just too much for companies to tackle today.
Yeah, and we get a lot of that, and that feeds into these reports as well, of talking with customers, talking with some vendors and others to get the feedback of what everyone is seeing. Again, the customers directly through discussions we have, and then again, vendors giving what they see. So taking all this together, and a lot of it is, as you say, right? It's who owns these devices, and it's a bit of a mix. And sometimes it's a lot of finger pointing. Oh, you do, and
nobody
no one
wants
updates
to.
it. Exactly right. The how do we tackle this is a big one. And as we just talked about, right, there's emerging solutions that are starting to pop up, but some of the old stuff was these massive IoT management systems. Well, you bring that in, it takes another team to manage that, especially you get to the larger enterprises. Well, these teams are stretched, to the breaking point already, and whether it's IT or security, the analysts in these teams are already working full days, going home, continuing to work, and now you want to tack on another technology to manage it and secure. Yeah. Burnout was bad enough as it is. You got to have people going, that's it, I'm done. I don't need this anymore. And I don't even want to talk about connected vehicle security. You want to really scare yourself, go down that rat hole. Oh.
Right. And there's a whole, like, once you get into firmware, you're not just talking about IoT devices anymore. I mean, at least smartphones are fairly simple. Like either you've got an update available from a manufacturer or a telecom, or you don't. You can apply the update or not. But you get into laptops, the firmware on mobile devices like laptops, and there are computers and firmware embedded all over the place within a lot of these things, and and a lot of companies, you might have half a dozen to a dozen PC vendors. You've got Macs, you've got just a mix of different devices here, different firmware levels. Like just looking at the work that companies like Eclipsium are doing here, it's not just IoT where we have this kind of firmware, this visibility of low level computing code on these devices and vulnerabilities and misconfigurations. We've got them within, the laptop sitting right in front of everybody too, as a problem.
Yeah. And to compound to that, it's anywhere work, right? I take my device, I go home and I work in my network. Well, what are my IoT devices in my home network doing, and how are they impacted? And if someone compromises that, they now have a chance, if the attacker is skilled enough, to compromise my business laptop and then compromise Forrester. Oops.
Yeah.
So we've just taken the problems that have existed and extended it by everyone, work at where you feel comfortable. And don't get me wrong, if I had to work at an office day in, day out, I don't know if I could grind that one out. But it introduces challenges to these teams that they don't know how to address as it is with what's inside the building. Now, how do they help the end user address it in their home network? Myself, I'm a bit of a Luddite, and I don't have any, home automation solutions or anything like that. And plus, I think of things in a security mindset. So I've got multiple networks and firewalls between everything. I'm just a bit of a nut about it, but most people don't, and I don't blame them. I'm not going to blame people for doing that, but it extends the problem, especially if you keep maintaining things like VPNs. A VPN on a home PC, you've now taken that home network, which is possibly the most insecure thing running, and attached it to a business network. Way to go. So many issues.
Yeah, with your Netgear Nighthawk that hasn't been updated since the day it was purchased from Best Buy.
Exactly.
Yeah. So with these surveys, do you get any sense for how mature do people even have IoT security programs? Is it just folded into their vulnerability management program? Do you have any sense of the maturity level of people attacking this problem, or how they're thinking about this problem? Are they thinking about it separately, or is this just the redheaded stepchild kind of attached to vulnerability management?
Yeah, I mean, we do get some sense of that from the surveys, and it's part of the initiative side, right? As well as what are they planning on spending their budgets on, whether it's IT budgets or security budgets. So there's certainly a thought and a concern going on, with these leaders. The challenge is, take, for example, a somewhat related but different category. We talked earlier of mobile devices. Security leaders understand that mobile security is a concern. The implementation of it, though, any tools for this, state of endpoint we talked about last year, the use of even basic mobile anti-malware, never mind mobile threat defense, below 50%. MTD was down in like the 30s or something to that effect. So there's concern, and they want to address it, but they don't. Other initiatives take hold. Something big pops right now, and they get redirected, and they spend the money on that, and then next year start all over again.
Right. So, what else from the report? Any other interesting insights that you pulled out of this?
I think a lot of this was things we talked about. One of them was on the patching side, as you talked about. These devices are incredibly old in some cases, or brand new. So having that patch management solution in place, it's a concern as you talk about, right, on the PC, the mobile server workloads and things like that. And they're now just starting to go, yeah, we do have to address that on IoT. How do we do it? Right. And some of this also comes from the interviews and discussions that we do with our customers in various industries. You talk to someone in finance and they're dealing, like I mentioned, there's those rapid check scanners, right? Many decades ago, I worked as a teller at one point, and I remember having these big bulky scanning machines. They're dealing with devices like that, as well as brand new customer interaction IoT devices, or badge sensors that are wireless and can track the employee throughout the building or the complex to make sure that they're where they should be and not going to, where the vault is when they're not part of it. So some of this is understanding how do you effectively manage, patching and vulnerability scanning across these solutions. And like I said, it's a concern they have, and they're starting to spend time and money on it. But how fast can they get to it to address the attacks? We've talked before. You take a botnet like Mirai. Mirai has been running since 2016 through its various instances, right? And this is a denial of a service botnet, and it just keeps spinning over and changing and changing. I think FODSHU is one of the offshoots of that ran last year. And then GIFGET, I think, was another. And both of them, they were peaking at, as DDoS attacks, going for like, a terabyte of throughput.
Yeah.
These things are crushing. So this is some of the stuff that we were trying to find out and understand with this and address that or align that to what the business concerns were so that they can understand, look, here's where the problems are. Here's what you've done so far. And I understand here's where your priorities are. Get on those priorities. Start hitting it now because, this isn't slowing down. The attacks against these devices is just going to continue to grow. And this isn't just us saying this. If you look at various other folks in the industry, they're talking about this and they're showing the raw data of what these attacks look like. And it's pretty bad.
And a lot of it's just product design. Like you look at a lot of these IoT devices and they're coming out of organizations that aren't software companies. They don't know how to design a modern device. So you might have a console like updating the firmware might require you to go to the company's website, sign into with your support account, download a binary, and then log into a web server on the device. Very much like a 90s, 2000s, early 2000s idea of architecture, of how to manage these devices. Whereas, like if you look at any kind of modern, like a Nest device or any modern networking devices, everything's SaaS, right? And there's a console where you can manage multiple devices through a single console. You've got APIs, but I'm sure there's devices still out there where you've got to get an old laptop with an old web browser. You got to install Flash, and then you can log into the interface to upload that I've seen IoT devices where you have to have where it's a Java applet you have to run to connect to the device and update the firmware. So I wonder how many of these companies like how do you manage that centrally when you've got to go get an old XP laptop and put, an old version of the Java runtime on it just to update firmware.
Or even worse, where you have to go locally to the device. You've got to plug in, jack in through USB and do all of your updates that way.
Or something like that.
Yeah. And it really becomes a challenge that makes all these things we've talked about even worse. And again, I don't want to make this all doom and gloom. When I talk IoT or connected vehicle, I tend to go down this, ever spiraling, doomscape. But there's a lot of changes going on. You talked about the IOXT, right, and what's happening there on the consumer side, and that's translating into business as well. As well as some of the manufacturers are recognizing, hey, if we have a little more space in the firmware side and add a few more resources for CPU and memory and such, we can get a small security agent on there. Maybe it won't be able to prevent attacks, but we can integrate this into our SIEM or SOAR to understand what's going on and give us information off of the device so that we can now effectively track it, maintain, or understand potential vulnerabilities in the device, and at least give us some security posture of how this device is. And even if, like I said, we can't prevent on it, maybe we can move that prevention down to the network. So there are changes coming. It's just, as I said, you got to deal with the new as you bring in, and then keep maintaining that old stuff. And turning over an MRI machine, it sounds like a great idea, except of course it's a multi-million-dollar piece of equipment, so it doesn't happen too often.
So how much do you think legislation is going to have to move the needle here, where somebody just has to come in and say, look, you can't run that old stuff anymore? Like it's got to be something that's actively managed in terms of security patches.
Yeah, it's happening, and not only in the U.S., but it's happening globally. And there are some websites that pull together. I think it's IoT Trustmark is one of them, where they have like global security standards as well as recommendations, from government recommendations as well as government policy, right? The actual full-on regs, you have to comply with this. But they've got a great site which has all that compiled. I think there can be some benefit to it. To me, the challenge with regulation winds up being it's a race to the bottom of can we do just this much and pass the reg, right? So we don't have to do any more. And now that we've passed it this year, that's it. Next year, don't have to worry about it because, you backdate that regulation. You force people to spend millions, if not billions of dollars. And no, you can't do that. We'll go out of business. So they talk to congressmen and changes the reg and doesn't get anywhere. The standardization side, I think, is the more interesting one. And there's a push around on IoT standards. And I think that might have a bit more influence because it's hitting the device manufacturers to say, make your devices better. And it's hitting the software solution companies to say, make your vulnerability scanning better, make your network controls better, so that even if we can't remove this 10, 15-year-old device, we can put enough barriers around it at the various stages, from the network, from endpoint security sensors and vulnerability scanning, to at least protect it so that it doesn't get attacked, right? We can't change the device, but we can put the moats, if you will, around there. And and really control what gets in and out of that device better. And to be brutally honest, I think a lot of businesses, if they took that basic level of, dare I say the term, network access control, right? It's a bad word that, it had a great sounding name for a while and people didn't do much with it. But if you took those basic things of restricting what devices or people on your network can talk to that IoT device, as well as who they can talk to internally, as well as externally, you've overcome so many challenges that all these other things now become, we'll say, icing on top of it.
Yeah, zero trust initiatives should be doing exactly that, right? Should be, separating that stuff out, limiting the damage it could do if compromised, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, and it's this thing's happening, like I said, on the network edge. Not only the identification, but some of the cool stuff I've been hearing about from some of the vendors is that they're doing traffic patterns. So this device is communicating with these external websites, right? And it's developing standards to look for normal traffic flow. And then if something goes off, it deviates from that standard, it pops alerts. Right. And this is kind of interesting because you can say, well, why did that device now start sending massive amounts of data? Did someone compromise the device? Is it just time of day, whatnot? Or the other side is traffic coming inbound to that device from maybe the manufacturer. So if there's now a massive influx of data to this device from the manufacturer, what changed? Was a firmware update pushed? Was the manufacturer compromised? We'll talk about problems, with the supply chain. Well, there's another attack vector. So
Yeah, you see companies like Netography, like there's a new generation of network anomaly detection
Yeah.
technology
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So sure, yeah. Um, so how many of these reports have you guys? How long have you been doing this annually? I think you said it was 4 or 5 years.
Yeah. So state of reports can be an annual or semi-annual release. So the last one that was done, I came to Forrester last year. Before me, the team did it in 2021. So every year, every other year, I included IoT devices as part of state of endpoint security last year when I worked on that report with the team, because you know my coverage is endpoint, and as you said in the intro, right, it's a wide range of things. So I wanted to make sure that that was addressed last year. But you know, will I do or will we do IoT state of IoT security next year? Not sure. We'll see how the data flows. Right? Is it that different from this year?
Well,
If it's
that's kind
not
of the
too
reason I
far,
ask. Yeah, so
yeah.
that's the question is, are you seeing any positive developments here? Are you seeing any signs of hope that things are getting better, or yeah, I guess you're kind of already answering the question. You're like, maybe it's not even worth doing another state of
Yeah,
IoT report next year.
yeah, and we'll have to see what the data comes back with, right? We get the surveys out throughout various times of the year, depending on what the survey is. So as the data comes back, that gives us analysts some understanding of, all right, next year, right, 2024. It's really scary saying that term. What does this look like? And if it's not that much of a variance between years, okay, you know, maybe it's not worth doing it. But who knows, right? And there's other reports that kind of tie to this stuff. So, we talk about endpoint security, right? Doing that last year, state of endpoint security. Well, that led to a landscape that we did at the end of the year on endpoint security, and it's leading to a wave on endpoint security that's kicked off this year. So we tend to compound these reports, right? So take the data from one, analyze it, understand, do we need to dive deeper? Do we need to do these landscapes talking about the various vendors in this space and then do a comparative analysis? Or here's this information, stew on it, and then maybe next year we'll get to another stuff. So like I said, they do tend to build off of each other.
All right. Good stuff. Patty, thank you so much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today.
Thank you, Adrian. Appreciate it.
All right. We'll be right back in a few moments with the weekly enterprise news.